Right. Any questions? You don't have to ask questions about the reading because we're going to get to that whole big thing. It's Perfective Day. It's Perfective Tuesday. Or it was Perfective Tuesday. Any questions or thoughts before we get started? Okay. Let's go around, and we did this before. So repeating what we did before is fine. Well, let's try not to repeat what we say now, though. So we'll go around. I've got Nawea, Dashjini, then we go out, and I see Yakutat, Kwanlin Dun, and we come back to Simuk and Kutrich. Just say in a perfective, any verb in the perfective mode. Any verb in the perfective mode. And we'll try not to repeat, so don't say one that's already been said. Okay.
Wasa wuti we pui.
Okay. Okay. Kuwuch.
Quokka.
Okay. Is anybody with you? Adisa inkhsati. Jawa. Okay. Disalaguk. Okay. Kleina khageti. Kwanlin iit khoha.
Hawisinech hayu katangi gugenk huatu.
Okay. That was two.
Kukunuk.
One more time, sorry, cut out.
Kukunuk.
Okay.
Kukunuk.
Okay.
Kakwe khwashu.
Okay. Perfective.
So Kwagut.
Okay. Shukaishitzuch.
Ilchsati.
Okay. Hey, you gotta come up to the table. How good? We'll make room. Akhani qanu. Akhani qanu. Any verb in the perfective mode. Any verb whatsoever.
Tgitgia ichsati.
Kuwuch.
Adiwugut.
Okay. Kwanlin iitchoa.
Fred Meyer's gosh, Sunny Boy, Huau.
Okay. Funny boy. Tipu.
Tlish Hwasiku Kla Hutwudichwet is perfective or?
Those were both perfective. Good job. I'm glad that you were just thinking of examples and not making a statement.
Well, I know we're not allowed to say that.
Okay.
Achidia tawahake.
Kuaking.
Okay. Okay. Kludziti.
Gitgia, see, Gitgia. Kagot, I put it together now.
At would
To see, I will see. Cookwood.
Oh.
Cookwood tea.
well, that's future. We gotta go.
I'm trying to pull the whole thought together.
Oh, okay.
Cookwood, sugar cahin, RJ. Oh man, made with hands. Crossed verb.
Oh, shit.
Achiyek. No, that's look over his name.
No.
Achiyek. To
Oh,
make.
shit.
Achiyek.
Okay.
Ade hasu art.
Achtu Huahun.
Okay. Yakta.
Wasa wuki iyagi.
Okay. Kwanlin, Yitwa.
Llaus llagu akawlinik.
Ye ausine.
Okay.
Doing achwavos.
Okay.
Shtuchachtu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stu. Chwetli. Okay. Open it up. Anybody, think of any perfective verbs.
Kawin.
Akawanik,
Chosiku.
Chwesaku, Akausacha, Akawaha, Tsiyanaka,
Wuduziku. Yeaka.
Wuditsiku,
Wunik.
Wunik, Wuke,
Uwachash. Awachash.
Awachash, Audagan,
Ayaudati.
Kuake.
Kuwake,
Just the cut ku.
Kaudagan,
Kuntigwas.
Kludigwats. Yake. Okay. So I'm going to read a few sentences. Let's see. No, maybe we'll do that after the break. We'll do that after the break. Okay. Let's get into the perfective. So one of the things that we can look at. So this, let me share the screen here. Hold on. Introducing like this. Uh-oh.
Oh.
Into infinity we go. Okay. Save.
And beyond. Sorry.
So now that we've returned from another dimension, talking about like teaching Tlingit this way, it's really interesting to me. I've been thinking about it a lot. A lot of credit needs to be given to Koinak, Richard Dallenhauer, who would always talk to us about these different modes, and the terminology has changed. If you've been studying Tlingit since the 90s or the 2000s, you've gone through all these terminology switches, and it's been really interesting. Also, nation story. Hast du Tlingit sai Sakuga?
Something claw.
Yeah.
Shachu Kwa, Nats Kla. Also, Weha, who has a He has two names. One is a Yenyedi name, Weiha. One is a Sukahati name,
Right.
Yesh. Oh, I guess that too. Yesh Pune, the second. Also, Gishawu, who is Anach Teidi. Zeus, who is Deshitan. Tutankhan, that's a Kagwantan name, Seth Cable. So there's a lot of stuff that's been going on with Tlingit and sort of looking at these different methods of how to put these verb modes together. And if we can sort of, our main goal here is to try and demystify some of these things, but it takes a lot of, I think, repetition and just memorizing and seeing how to use these different charts and putting them together more and more and more and more. We'll start with the sort of complicated part. And they're all complicated parts, but we're complicated people. So we're just the right kind of people for these kinds of things. So when we talk about stem variation, we're really talking about what is the shape of that stem. So we call it a root. The root would be too, T-O-O-W, neek, N-E-E-K. So when we write the stem, we write it long and low, unless we know it's an invariable stem. Khan, like irsakhan, that is always short and high, every single time. So now there's a sort of trend where we mark invariable stems. Right? And that's usually done with a little cross afterwards. That means however it looks in that theme, that skeleton, you'll write it that way every single time. Nosh is one of those, to shake, like shake something to and fro, like your head especially, or your fingers. We talked about that one. Khan is another one. So there'll be a few that you run into that are invariable. And those are fun because all you got to learn is the prefix. With the others, you have to learn, sort of like every verb has a conjugation prefix, which could be 0, na, ga, or qa. Every verb is also some type of verb, position, state, act, event, or motion. Every verb also has a stem type. So the stem types, when we see CVV, this means it's an open root. This is your run-of-the-mill open root. CVV with the little H on it. And this is all the kind of newer stuff. I think everything in the last 5 years. If you go beyond that, the H wasn't really there. This is a stem that wasn't really marked, a stem type. And we call this a fading stem. And it has certain characteristics it takes on from Tonga's Tlingit, which nobody speaks anymore, but all signs point to it being the first Tlingit, because there's certain patterns that are otherwise unexplainable, and a lot of those you'll see in stem variation. So when it comes to an open stem, it means it's one of those or the other. So the other thing that you'll see when we get into, and we're talking about the perfective positive, right? The positive perfective form, which we loosely translate in English to it happened or it's happening. Right? Those are, or maybe it is that way. So what we got here is we'll see there's 0 and everything else. 0 conjugation prefix, and then na, ga, and qa. And what you'll see in both of these cases, long and high or long and low. So if you see an open root that is long and high in a perfective form, and you're going to learn how to spot that perfective. Usually you're looking for a W or a Y sort of popping up in this certain spot in the prefix. If it's high, you know it's 0. If it's low, you know it's one of these other 3. Then you just got to watch for other things. Like if you can get the progressive, ga would be K na verb, and qa would be ye na verb. So this is how you can spot the conjugation prefix if it isn't documented. Everything most things prior to the Edwards Dictionary did not note the conjugation prefix. And so the newer material, we're trying to note all of the stuff that you need to conjugate the verb, even though there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So these are your two types of open roots. So is it open or closed? If it's open, it's either this one or that one. Okay? For your closed roots, you have your run-of-the-mill regular closed, what we call glottalized, which means there's no low form. It's either long and high or short and high. Or there's an ejective, so it ends with an apostrophe, same thing. It can only be long and high or short and high. So these last two, there cannot be a low form. So those are marked when you see a root. If the root is unmarked, it means it's a regular root. If it has a high tone in the theme, that means it's glottalized. If it has a high tone and an apostrophe, it's ejective. So coming back to this, you should be able to see then what the stem should be in these different forms. So again, even though these are all different, if we look at the perfective, if it's a closed root and it's short and high, it has to be a zero conjugation prefix, unless it's invariable. So these are just a couple other things. Otherwise, as you start to put these together, and we're trying to, when I say we, like the Tlingit linguistic community, we're trying to create some resources so that at least they're conjugated in all these different modes for you. Because sometimes it's just a lot to commit to memory, right? Oh, okay, it's short and high. Okay, that must be zero. Oh, it's long and low. Now you don't know. It's one of these others. So you've got zero and everything else. And we're going to see this pattern in the classifier as well. There's zero group classifiers, and there's everything else. Right? And that just tells you the zero came first, as far as however Tlingit kind of came together over time.
And then CVVCs, these are the shapes of the sound that is coming out, right?
Well, so this says consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant. So if the verb is T, so we go up here and if like achjit ti, so this is going to be one of, I think it's this one. Yeah, achjit awati, right? And so it depends, well, shoot, that's not a good example. Let me think of one that I know really well.
I'm just asking, that's the shape the sound comes out, right?
Right. Well, like let's say, for example, if it were teen, and if it were this one, we would have tin,
yeah.
Teen, tin, teen, tich, tich, right? So this is saying, really all this chart is showing you is the vowels. That's the most important part of this chart is the vowels. Mm-hmm. Is it long and there'll be two, or is it short and there'll be one? Is it high and it'll be marked, or is it low? So that's what this shows. This shows you what the stem shape should be. And it's something you got to just sort of keep coming back to, take a peek at it now and then. It's not the most, it's an important thing, but I think the other parts are what you sort of start with. Okay, so thinking about our perfective, this has been probably the most mind-numbing chapter that I've written on Tlingit yet. And so I'm trying to find a whole bunch of examples. And the idea of this chapter is to get the perfective in a way that you can sort of see it in all these different examples, right? So one of the things that we start to learn to do with verbs is you can memorize a whole bunch of stuff in a language, but pretty soon you got to be able to start, I sewed, you sewed, or I sewed it. So if we go through these one at a time, and everybody just, you can look at the English example here, and everybody just repeat after me. Huaka, watuwaka, yika, yika, awaka, hasawaka,
Hus awa ka.
Wuduwaka.
Uduwa ka.
Something that was pointed out in a class a couple weeks ago by Cicela is that hus is a pluralizer for people, and dach would be the pluralizer for non-people. So like if there were these dogs who were sewing for whatever reason, we would say dach awaka we cake, which is just, it's awesome. Like there's always some new thing to discover. But our focus here is on, so like ka, we could see there's the stem, right? The root is ka, underline K-A-A. But the stem, once we add the stem variation, underline K, long and high A. Ka, 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 ka. Now we focus on the prefix. Hua, watua, yi, yi, awa, hus, awa, wadua. Okay? So the first, go.
Kune, why doesn't the classifier change to plus D with that? It was so? Is it because it's zero classifier? Or?
Yes. So the other thing you're going to notice in this chapter is there's going to be examples with the fourth person human. The fourth person, which is du, and we translate as like the verb happened. Whenever you have du, you get this classifier sort of negation rule. It means it doesn't matter. Every zero group classifier is going to be plus, or is going to be minus D, right? So if, for example, if we kick the object out of this verb, we would have a different shape. Khwadaka, wututaka, yidaka, yidaka, audaka, has audaka, wuduwaka. So this is why when you have two verbs that are kind of almost identical, but there's a plus D version, if it's a zero group classifier, the duh, the fourth person will always be minus D, because it would be too silly to say wududaka, right? It's sort of like in English when someone says, well, when I do it, and you're like, do? That same thing, you don't want us to go do, and you don't want to go do da. It won't allow that to happen. But every other non-zero group, so again, zero and everything else, we see that pattern all over the place. And we're going to see it in these examples. If that's an S classifier or an L classifier or an SH classifier, it will always be plus D in the fourth person. Okay, guy? So you just gotta remember those rules. Fourth person, zero group, always zero. Or always minus D, sorry. Fourth person, everything else, always plus D. Okay. So when we look at these examples, when we look at English, we see I, we, you all, he or she, they, and then nothing there. But sewed. So the verb itself doesn't change. So you can learn how to conjugate in English pretty fast, right? You get a little bit of confusion over whether it's like he or she or him or her, but it's pretty manageable. But in Tlingit, you've got hua, watua, yi, awa, has awa, wadua. Right, so those are but there's patterns. We're going to see these patterns. We're going to look at a bunch of different examples. And so putting a section together like this, it means combing through all the resources and finding all these different sort of verbs that have these specific qualities. And what we're going to do is we'll move through them in these different sets. And so what Nietzsche Gahati was asking for was to sort of write a table. What are the different pieces here? So when we say hua ka, there's no pluralizer here, but we have a zero object, the y perfective, ch subject, ya classifier. So y plus ch plus ya is hua, long. You're going to get that every single time.
Still so confused on the U as the perfective marker all of a sudden. Like that must have happened in the past few years.
Yeah, I think that's happened in the past 2 or 3 years, maybe. But I think Jeff was writing it like that before. So, but we note the classifier, and you could write it as a W if you're more comfortable writing it as a W. You can, but the thing is, it's like, and with the perfective, it's gonna be a W, except in the case of the second person. So that's the one thing to keep in mind is if it precedes I or Y, it'll become a Y, right? And the other thing.
So why does the ha appear in the conjugated verb before the y in
That's new too.
ha?
So the perfective is here, but it will jump to the other side of the subject in cha, in ye, and I think that's it. Because then we see watuwa, wadua, awa, right? And here it's just kind of getting absorbed. Because what you've got to keep in mind is when you've got wa here, you're kind of running into, that's the classifier. And the classifier is the same thing. It's going to be ya, but it's going to change to wa in a lot of cases. And so, and the thing with these sort of soft beginnings, yu and ya, is that they can sometimes just get absorbed and just become a kind of almost a set of vowels. So what happens with yu and I and ya is the yu, this is still there, it turns into a y, and then this kind of just gets absorbed into this sound. So you get yi.
Yeah, Carrie would always write wu plus I plus ya is yi.
Mhm.
And you or wu plus ya is wa. I mean, usually that's what I would turn into.
And yeah, it'll have a different shape if there's not an object, right? So you could say atwujakain. He is jumping around, or she is jumping around. And this third person object is what changes that shape. And so because you've got this meeting that, and then that, you get awa. And so they're just getting absorbed, and these are just things that happen, however you want to sort of piece it together in your mind. But what we're kind of finding is you look at a whole bunch of these verbs and prefixes, these are the spots where they are. But in Tlingit, it's pretty fluid because things start jumping around. And this is where Tlingit gets a leg up on there's other languages that are little pieces that all add up to make these big words. But a lot of times they don't. You can just put as many of them together as you want, and they don't change each other. But with Tlingit, they start contracting and interacting.
Quite enough would always say because of the flow of the language. It would be
Right.
so much easier to say awaka than awuya ka.
Right. Has ayu ya ka, right? And then people are like, what? And so, yeah, there's a flow. It wants to contract. It wants things, and especially in the prefix, because Tlingit wants you to know that information, but it wants to sort of, it's in a hurry to get to that stem as well. So again, we've got the preverb, that's going to be has. We've got the prefix, which in the case of the classifier is going to be object, perfective, subject, classifier, or in the perfective side. The one thing we're going to do after this, though, after we look at some examples with different types of classifiers, is we're going to add the thematic prefix right here, in between the object and the perfective. But you see, once you've got the root, you can actually you learn these patterns, and then you can apply any of those patterns, and then the root stays the same for the stem. Okay. Everybody okay? On we go. So when we segmented out, we were writing it y these days because this is, and as we sort of, this sound did exist. It was kind of it was this nasal sound that existed in Tlingit but does not anymore. But if you listen to some old recordings, they might say duwadi and duwakuske, and we always say yadi and yakuske these days. But it used to be a lot of the different Y's, and the ya for the vertical surface acts this way as well. But it's it gets affected by vowels that are before it. And so these are just some things to keep in mind. And so this is what we call the perfective marker. And one thing to keep in mind with the perfective positive, there are two things you need for that. You need the perfective marker and the plus I form of the classifier. Okay. So here's, and to talk about what the perfective is, it's really interesting to think about. The perfective is not a tense marker, right? It doesn't say this puts it in the past tense, right? But what the perfective does, and it exists in other languages, it exists in, I think, all the Na-Dene languages, but what it does is it allows you to see the verb as this event. And we have event verbs, but this just says we're looking at the verb as an event, which means there was this point in time and then the verb occurred. And so there's time on one side of the verb and there's time on the other side of the verb. And it gets interesting too, because there's multiple ways you can translate different perfective verbs. Because all that it's telling you is the verb has occurred. It is not telling you when that verb occurs, right? Because you say, ausaku, he or she knows it. But that one couldn't really translate into knew it, because when we say in English, oh yeah, I knew that. Sometimes you're saying, I know that, but other times you might be saying, I knew that but forgot, or he or she knew that but forgot.
Well, you can't know it, this is how they explain it to me, you can't know it without already having known it.
Right.
And like, woody quet, you can't be tired without already have gotten tired.
So like a lot of the state verbs are you'll just have this perfective form, and the state verbs are gonna want that because it says you can't be tired unless you're tired. You can't know it unless you know it. So this is how Tlingit looks at. Tlingit tends to look at the things in terms of events much more than in terms of time. So I could say, tatge irsatin, yidet irsatin, right? It's the same thing. I saw you yesterday, I see you right now. I understand you. I understood you, right? Kaudagan, it's bright, or it was bright. So these are conjugating, and so the perfective is not showing us time, but instead it's another way to look at the verb and say there's this verb that's an event, kind of in time, but the time isn't necessarily important. So ausaku, all of these are going to be plus I classifiers. All of them are going to have the perfective. The object and subject you can change on either side, and it's going to change the shape of it. And we'll look at how that works. But these are the only things that you really got to worry about. Once you get that perfective form, you don't have to start adding a whole bunch of other stuff, because we've been practicing doing this. And the first verb that we did this was sechan, or asechan. So there's an object, subject, a classifier that's not going to change, and also a root that's not going to change. But because we're not switching modes, there's a lot of things that stay the same. And so what we're focusing on now is, what does this prefix look like when we start changing it around? Okay. So the thing we've got to keep in mind is, what are the plus I classifiers for all of these groups? So in the 0 group, it's ya. In the D plus 0 group, it's di. S group, it's si. D plus S, it's zi. The L group is kli. The DL group is gli. The SH group is sh. And the DSH group is j. So these are the classifiers that are going to emerge. So as we go through, the perfective marker appears in 4 types of verbs. The perfective positive, the perfective negative, the perfective habitual, both in the perfective habitual negative, right? And the way that these generally translate is, she or he did it, or she or he is in this certain state. In some cases, it could be just going on right now. He or she didn't do it. he or she does it every time. Oops, every me. Every me. And then hasn't done it yet. So these are ones like the concepts, they're not always like total opposites, right? But they do, what they do is they show us how the perfectual is really an event building system, not a tense building system. So here's the same verb in these different forms. Awacha, she or he ate it. Kesh awacha, she or he didn't eat it. Uchaich, she or he eats it every time. Oh, I know what happened. It's a cut and paste thing. When I go from like a PDF, like the TI and combination, it just doesn't like it. It just does. I'm not even going to look at it. And then we have kesh uchaich, she or he hasn't eaten it yet. Right, so if we want to be able to convey complex concepts in Tlingit, we have to sort of start wrapping our minds around some of these things. It just comes with reading what the breakdown is, looking at a whole bunch of different forms, and then sometimes if your brain's getting tired with all the technical stuff, you just go in and read a story and just, photocopy the story and circle all of the perfective verbs and just look at them. What do they look like, right? And that way, if we do an exercise and we say, okay, let's do a bunch of perfective verbs, if you've got Carrie's new material, you've got all this different material that's out there, and we should be able to go around a whole bunch of times. Because one of the things you want to do is just keep learning more and more and more verbs. Like I just found a verb today for bringing food to like a potluck or a potluck. There's a special verb. And that verb exists only for that concept. It's very interesting. Okay, so here are the components that are in there. For the perfective, you had the perfective mark and the plus I classifier. For the perfective negative, you get kech in the preverb, you get the irialis, you get the perfective, you get a minus I classifier. So what the plus I classifier really says is like, this verb happened. The minus I means hasn't happened, right? But it's kind of interesting because then you get the irialis could be in there because the perfective says, well, let's look at this thing as an event, and plus I means it's been completed, minus I means it hasn't been completed. But you also have the irialis, which is it's specifying that there's some, like it hasn't happened. And it's another way to specify it. There's a relationship between the perfective marker and the plus I, just like there's a relationship between the irialis and the minus I.
So in the kif awucha, where is the irialis present up there? Like I see the perfective marker.
So whenever you get the irialis and the perfective, 90% of the time you can't see them, they just kind of blend together. Because they both occur in between the object and the perfective marker. The only place you could see them is in some of these habituals where there's a conjugation prefix, and then you might get it there, and it'll be these really kind of odd ones. And here, like you say,
what about like kishwacha?
We say kesh, and there you've got oo, because instead of w, you have oo, because you have plus y plus cha plus 0 plus cha. And then you get the YCH, which is the habitual going on there. Because if a lot of times if there's a closing suffix on an open stem, it'll change the shape of that stem. So you go from cha to chai. You go from qu to qwe. And those are the types of things that happen. But here, awacha, you don't see it. You don't. Kesh awucha. Sometimes they just sort of combine. The only thing that can happen is the front of the verb is sometimes less likely to contract if other things are coming up against it. Did you guys have a question?
Where is the conjugation prefix in the habitual there?
In this habitual, what is the conjugation prefix for this verb? It's a 0. So you say cha, right? And so because it's a 0, it's not going to affect it. But if when we get to the perfective habitual, we'll see it in other cases, right? And so we'll see other perfective habitual verbs, and then we'll see examples of that. We'll see it every time. The puns will continue. So let me see if I can find. So on the perfective habitual, so here it is, to hold someone or to grab them every time. Ach, shashatch. So there, it's a 0. That's a 0. Here's one. Ye tundenukch. Oh, yesh tundenukch. I feel that way every time I study Tlingit. Yesh tundenukch. So there's the N popping up there. Right?
Is that the mode in the first one? Ugh, the X is a mode rather than a conjugation prefix now? Is that what that X underline is?
Oh, no, oh, sorry. That is the conjugation prefix. Thanks, you spotted that. So the ka mode and the ka conjugation prefix, if they get a bunch of stuff before it, they're going to switch to an underline X, and in the first person, they'll switch to an underline K, right? Like there's a song, Achtu yake yi'aniqagudi, something like that, right? And so you're going to get these ka forms popping up in the first person. And you're going to see these a lot in the hortatives. And then you got ye, jin, and h. He or she works every time. Gakach, it gets better every time. So there's the ga conjugation popping up. But here, the perfective is pretty much. Right? So the perfective, it's weird. It doesn't seem to have a really strong effect, but then you get it other times, like right here. Uach, kudagunch, right? And so it's a really interesting thing. So the perfective, the more stuff you put around it, sometimes it just sort of gets a little bit lost. So it's a pretty soft kind of prefix, and these are some things that we see. But here you've got atgutch as opposed to adenagutch. Right? All right, back to the matter at hand. So we're going to get to these, but the goal here is to say the perfective really only appears in 4 things, and these are them. So it's really, and it's talking about these event type. It makes it into an event. It happened or it didn't happen. It happens every time or it hasn't happened yet. It's really what the perfective marker does, is it pushes us to think about this verb as being this sort of event that either happens or doesn't. So the plus I classifier is a little bit kind of funkier. There's this thing called the realizational, which is, I don't understand how it works, but sometimes, like, if you study songs, I think where there's just a song the other day, we're looking at it, and we're like, why is there N in there? For like crying or something, it was like undaqach or something like that, and we're like, it was like chat undaqach, and we're like, I don't know, because there's no, you might say, well, if there was a ch on the end, you say, well, that's probably the perfective habitual, but there's this realizational thing. I don't know if anybody really knows what it does. You can read through some of Crippen's stuff and Lear's stuff if you want to read more about it. But if you see these weird forms, they look a lot like imperfectives, but then they have the conjugation prefix in there, but nothing else. Because usually when you see the conjugation prefix, there's a number of other things you might see. But when you got the conjugation prefix and a plus I classifier and nothing else around it, then it's this realizational form. But it pops up really only in songs. There's a couple people, I think, that Austin Hammond used to use it, and some others. But it would be really like high quality orators, like they really understand how Tlingit works. So our focus is on the perfective, state imperfectives, right? So plus I means it happened. So for it to be in a certain state, it must have happened. That's why it's yak a, right? And then potentials, and potentials are just kind of funky because there's a few different potentials, but the three most common ones are might do it, might not do it, and no way she or he can do it. Right? So again, so here's a perfective. Awacha. Here's an imperfective state verb. Yakei. A realizational. Shinklahash. And then here's a potential. Akwachayi. But the potential is interesting. Once you learn it, you could say akwachayi, kesh akwachayi, kesh ade akwachayi.
No tones in it, huh?
No, and so what happens is that the tone tends to get kind of squashed. But it's not that way all the time, but if you put yeah after it, usually it'll kind of flatten the tone before it. But so this is sort of saying, and for some reason it's going plus I, but I think it's just saying when this, because these are always usually tied to some other sort of concept, and the logic kind of escapes me when I think about it. I try not to think about this one too much. But these are just keeping, keep your eye out when you see the other, because other than these, everything else is minus I. Every single other verb mode is minus I. These are the only ones that are plus I as far as the classifier goes. So when we start thinking about how the classifier works, these are some things we think about. Okay. Moving on. As far as the different components that are in here, so here again, the perfective, which is what we're focusing on, you get the perfective marker and the plus I for the classifier. In the imperfective state verb, I don't know if I'll ever write a chapter on imperfective. I'm just going to say look it up, memorize it, conjugate it from there. There's like 20 different types of imperfectives. I don't understand how many of them. For the potentials, again, so you're changing what's around it. So to go from positive to negative, you just add kite. To go to attributive, this potential attributive, which is a weird, we probably will end up renaming that. Kesh a day, verbi yeah. But it has to have the irialis, the conjugation prefix, the plus I classifier. Kesh a day un pakudiye. There's no way I can walk over there. Right? And so it's a form that you'll see speakers, they like to use that form. I think of Johnny Marks on the tape, like I can't sleep. Right? And that's how you say it. And so it is a verb form that's used quite a bit in Tlingit, but it's also sort of a tricky one. But once you learn how to put that potential together, then you can. This is the most common one, I think. Is this kesh a day, verbi yeah. And now we get to the exceptions chapter, or section of the chapter. If it's a plus I, even if it's a plus I version of the classifier, if it becomes a dependent clause, it's blank, good to see you, it's good, I know, I want, and whenever you want another verb, that verb should be in a dependent form. And that means it gets this relational suffix, and the classifier goes minus I. Irsitin, yake irsatine, chwacha, chwasaku chwachaye. So we see that it shortens right here. Yutz'ik chwajak, yutz'ik chwajaki ach tuwasagu. Okay. All right. Less thinking, more examples. So coming back to this sort of switchboard thing, if this were our metaphor for talking about Tlingit, you would turn this switch on, the perfective switch. The subject switch can move around, classifier group can move around, but it has to stay plus I. Those are the only things that you switch to turn the perfective mode on. It doesn't take a lot of changes, but then we just got to learn what these different prefix shapes are like. Yeah? Leave that on your The other thing is in the prefix, there's two different types of prefixes. There's things that mean something, and there's things that just have a grammatical function, right? So we're going to have these conjugation prefixes, qa mode, ga mode, na mode, and the conjugation prefixes. They don't really mean anything. They just get turned on to put the verb in a certain mode. All these other things kind of mean something. And then we can learn those meanings, and as they stack together, we can see how they work. And again, coming back to when we think of these thematic prefixes, there's like these three categories. So you can have up to 3 of these thematic prefixes. And there's more than just the ones listed here, but these are the most common ones. So in the first, and when we say first, this is moving from the left side of the verb to the right. We have k, which is aerial. We have ka, which is comparative, which is why you say ye kuge. It was this. Ye kuge achiu chetangi. That's the size of my speech. And you walk off the stage. And then you have this thing called athematic. Right? So that one, what the athematic does, it says put the focus on the action, not on the object. Right? So you could say, he fished. Or you could say, qat, you fished a salmon. So the A would fall off in certain cases. And then the second one is where we get these ones that have a little bit more of a concrete meaning. Hand, inside, nose or point, voice, vertical surface, end, head, around, mouth or opening. And then in the third slot, you can have either a spherical surface or a horizontal surface. And they sound exactly the same. So these first examples we're going to look at, we've looked at ones with a 0 classifier, right? So that classifier is going to be ya. But if we move back and forth between, like, we'll read all of these, and then we'll look at what happens when we change the classifier group. And once we change the classifier group, we get a very predictable pattern. So you're going to have khwate, khwase, khwashe, khwadze, khwadle. It will all be exactly the same. You're just changing the consonant.
Is
That's
there
all you're going to do.
a certain page where I can actually look at this new organization of the classifiers on your dictionary? Because that's all. This is new. The classifiers to me.
Mm-hmm.
The whole new organization of it. Is there
Yeah. So in that Hausenech Yuchatangi, it's in a couple of different chapters. So as far as going back to the classifier, if we go to this section, the classifier in the root is probably the best section. So it's chapter 10. And it goes through these different sort of, and it shows some examples using this same set of sentences. And then starting on page 142, and so it's talking about the classifier, and then it shows this is the chart. So this is the way that we're looking at the classifier now. 0 group, S group, L group, SH group.
Okay.
It can go plus D, but the default is minus D. And it can go plus I, but the default is minus I. So it goes minus I to say, oh, the verb happened. And it goes plus D to say either somebody's doing it to themselves, or they're kind of a subject and an object, or we've kicked the object out. Right? So we say, awaqa, he or she sewed it. Awdaqa, or wudaqa, he or she sewed. Okay. So the goal here is to not just learn these patterns, but also to start learning these different verbs. Right? We gotta start learning a set of verbs. And I think the way you learn these verbs is you learn maybe some useful verbs, and then you start learning how to use them. So one of the things we should be able to do is start using these perfective modes to just sort of put some things together, right? And so I could tell you a short story using all perfective verbs. Tatke awe, achetki kachet hundakahitite utuwaat. Yewe watusatin, wech, get de yiktawe haswu waat, gauch ta ka gauch yeti, gauch ta awe du itch haswu at, we gauch yetki. Right? And so it's all, those are all perfective verbs. All those verbs are perfective. And it's a very important tool to communicate. Hey, I saw this thing yesterday. This happened yesterday. Kayatke, achye de chwakuch, ach kanachaya with the king shach, kanach kigay at ukeir tu ukea satin, adat ayatach watunk, ak owe yes. Kudzati atjawe shach ayat kla du ina kawani. Guk wait te aya nich kach aya kukti a akakukti newt. Yeah, we our newt wait te akayesh kudzati. So these are, there's a couple of future forms in there, but the rest were all perfective. So this is telling big stories, little stories, things like that. Okay. So, everybody okay? Questions, thoughts? Okay, so again, here's another zero group. When we get to the examples, we'll send it around so that you'll each get a turn to say it, and we'll all repeat it. And just really focus on like reading it carefully so you're seeing the vowel length and the tone. So what we see here is this is long and low in every example because this is an invariable. So when we find something, what do we find? It's always long and low every time, right? So we'd say, this is one of those examples where we might say, a, and it stays low, where the future form always wants to go long and high. And then here, going back to the sewing, and here we don't have an object. Right, so we say object, subject, zero group, A, long and low. Subject, classifier plus D plus classifier, ka. And if there's no mark here, that means it should take the stem variation of any standard zero conjugation. Root. Okay. Okay. So what we've got here, these are the things that the stem shows us. This stem, Jeff Lear started writing verbs this way, and then Carrie Eccleston worked with Jeff Lear, and they made a few changes to it, and then James Crippen and I talked about it, and we made a couple of other minor changes to it. But this is the order you're going to see things. O, that means it has an object. And the thing with Tlingit is that object has to be there every time, right? So for example, if we said, awat a, it, perfective and other stuff, he or she found. It, he or she found, right? So in English, you might say, she found it. But if you said she found paper, you wouldn't say she found it paper. That's what you would do with Tlingit. You would never drop the it. It stays in there. Right, so these are some concepts that we've got to keep in mind. If there's an O there, you've got to keep it in there. If there's an S, you've got to keep it in there. The zero is showing us the classifier group, a zero classifier. So we see ya all the way down here, the last thing in the prefix. Because if it's a perfective, it's got to be plus I, but it's a zero group, it has to be ya. The next one down, there's no object. So you can't put an object on there. You can't say awdqa. It doesn't make sense. You have to say awaka. Okay? So the object has been kicked out, which pushes the classifier plus D. D plus 0. So that means all of these are going to be DI. D, 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 D. Because it's D, these are going to be a little bit different. Hua, huade. Watuwa, watude. Yi, yide. Yi, yide. Awa, would. Awa, would. Wudua, wudua. Those ones, the fourth person is going to be the same. You know, there's not a lot of change there.
Kune,
Rasa?
wudu waka. So that's going minus D. Is that because it kind of refers to an object, like it was sown, or?
There's this overriding rule, right? The fourth person is like the most stubborn person ever invented. So the fourth person said, if I am here, every zero group classifier is minus D. Doesn't matter, no matter what, it goes minus D. Every non-zero classifier has to be plus D. That's why wududziku, it is known, right? Anytime you put the D in there, non-zeros go minus D. I mean, zeros go minus D, non-zeros go plus D. Every single time.
Just one other one, and you might have answered this, but why is the first person for te, why is it a long A there?
Right. So this is, again, coming back to there's zero, everything else. We have to learn the conjugation for the zero group, hua, watuwa, yi. So the yi also goes long. I'm using my mouse and I'm pointing with my finger at the same time. But what happens here is the perfective marker kind of jumps over and then it absorbs the classifier, because these are y and ya. So y plus cha plus ya is hua. Y plus I plus ya is yi. But once you remove it from the zero group, like if we just forget what the root is, and now we've got non-zero, we'll have huete, huese, huedze, huetle, huetle, hueshe, hueche.
I don't know if this would help you at all, but just the cha plus wu or you, cha plus wu plus ya usually always ends up being hua. Like it links those three together end up being the long. And that's how you can remember when you take when the classifier changes, it's not, like the ya gets absorbed. And I don't know what your term is for that though.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would say. And because the classifier cannot go away.
Just write that cha.
Has to show us that plus a. Yeah.
It's hua every time.
So the perfective plus the cha plus the ya. Hua. Every single time. And so we're going to see it in other even if we add thematic stuff on here, it'll still be hua, because that's just what you get. But once you change it, huete, huetle, huetle, huese, huedze, hueshe, hueche. Now the only thing that changes here is this consonant. It could be a D, an L, an S, a DL, a DZ, an SH, or a J. And we'll see it as we go through these different verbs. The patterns, they will emerge. But since we've got multiple goals here, we're also trying to learn how to use these different verbs, because this is to find something. And this says usually as the result of searching, but it was also explained to me that when you huate, like I just happened to find this thing too. Like, I don't know about the searching part yet. I'll have to keep talking to speakers about it. Any other? I know it's a lot. We'll keep looking at this. I'll give you guys the chapter to read to go back to other things. On Thursday, we'll try and do a story. We'll try and just relax a little bit. But I do think there's a key here that really unlocks your ability to speak and to be able to hear. Because then you'll catch wudaka. And you do this enough times, and pretty soon you just catch it, and it starts to make more sense.
I didn't catch what you were saying about the bit we were going over the verb to sow in the parentheses. You started saying something about, and these verbs will follow a normal pattern or something like that. I didn't catch that.
Yes, okay. Cheesh. So the other slight change is how we mark stem variation. So the first change is putting this little cross there. It's a little X, I guess. It's called a cross. It has some name. And that means this is going to be long and low every time. Another invariable stem is khan, like to love. That is going to be short and high every single time. Right? And so it's convenient because as you change modes, the stem never changes. It's always the same shape. But when it's unmarked, that means if you go back, so this is a zero conjugation verb, ha. So when we go back to this other chart here that was looking at stem variation, that means this, it's long and low, so you go to this category. So now if you needed the progressive imperfective, that would be this. This is the perfective. This is the perfective negative, the imperative. So this shows you what that stem should look like in these different modes. And so it conjugates normally. So really, we don't mark it if it conjugates. Or, I mean, sorry, if it varies like it typically would. If this were high tone, if this said ka, well, there's not one like that. But if there were a little h after it, I went to the wrong chart, then it would be here. So what in the theme, it's telling you the stem variation. Do we need a break? Okay. Come back at 10 till.
The internet has been pretty. Oh, sorry.
His computer's acting funny though.
After you.
Dasa?
Kune, I sat down with Ida on Sunday and I went over a bunch of verbs with her, and she doesn't, in Carcross, she doesn't use the da. But I will check with, again, with Keishi.
Sheesh. Well, I'll talk to some speakers here. I think tomorrow I'm working with some, and I'll see what they say. Okay.
So that other stuff you started is just reading and writing, yeah?
Mhm. And the Head Start stuff, yeah, somebody needs to. I think they expect more than I can probably do right now.
I mean, I could just take that with Laura and we can, I don't know.
Just come up with ideas, whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real bare bones thing right now.
Yeah.
But you're gonna need that InDesign. I don't know if they got you that yet.
So what?
InDesign. Adobe Creative Cloud stuff.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about
Yeah.
that.
Okay. You got a question?
What do you do if you didn't get to see that makeup work email in time before all the pages were claimed?
Split it with somebody
Yeah.
who took 4. Take it.
Everybody took 4. Half mine.
If we, I'll give you 1 page.
Yeah.
3.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have to do one.
Then all of us have 3.
Yeah, makes sense. As long as you're not doing like pages.
She has to do.
Hopefully there are 2 in a row.
She has to do like
Yeah.
3, 6, and 9.
We'll figure it out. Okay. Okay. So let's do this. We'll each take turns. We'll go in the column, start on the top, go down to the bottom, and then we'll go over to the next one, down to the bottom. If anybody has any questions, go for it. Otherwise, focus on prefix is the biggest thing. The stem, we can figure out the stem. These ones are they're not changing. These ones aren't changing. So one of the big things we learn when we start to conjugate in verb modes is that we're changing the prefix. And it's very dynamic, but it's also, you do this enough times and it is very predictable. Okay. So you'll say it, and we'll all repeat it. Say the prefix. Don't say the words, the prefix, say hua.
Huate.
Huate. Ook.
Wutuwate.
Wutuwate.
Yeet a.
Yeet
Sorry,
a.
yeet
Kuwuch.
Yeet.
Yeet a. Sisala.
Awate.
Awat a.
Wate.
Cheetwu.
Hus, what, hey.
Hus awat a.
Us.
Awate.
Would do what A.
Would do what a.
Would do a.
Sumek dasaway. Gled kakhinach wat a.
I found.
Would do what a.
We found.
It. We found it. See, when we know there's an object there, you cannot drop the object. Yeet a.
You found it.
Yeet a.
You all found it.
Awat a.
He, she, or it found it.
He or she.
Here.
It has to be he or she. It can never be an it.
Couldn't it be like a dog or something?
Yeah, it found it.
The dog is a he or she. I mean.
Can that just be?
And we're not
one?
saying it has to be he or she, but it has to be. It
It's
has
more
to be
like
this animate thing.
Found it. Is that more? Because it's like not specific. Is it?
You have to say he or she found it,
He or she.
or else you say would do a day. It was found.
Oh.
And that's how you remove agency. Tlingits look at animals just like you would conjugate it the same way, he or she. And English does the same thing, right? Like I guess you could say the dog found it, but if it's your dog, and you'd probably say, oh, he found it, she found it, depending on the gender of the dog. Has awat a.
They found it.
Would do what a.
It was found.
Okay.
Quadika.
What the car.
What they call.
Wutudika.
Would to the car.
Wutudika.
Yid the call.
Yid the car.
Yeet a ka.
Yidiqa. Kawuk.
Wudiqa.
Wudiqa. Sisala.
Haswudiqa.
Haswudiqa. Cheatwu.
Duwaka.
Okay, Cheatwu. Waso. Was. Kleka chenachdasaya. Khwadiqa.
I sewed it.
I sewed. So
I s-
going back to the root, there's no object.
Oh, okay.
What did you do last night? I sewed. There's no it. You cannot sew it. Okay. Wutudiqa.
We sewed.
Yidiqa.
You sewed.
Yidiqa.
You all sewed.
Wudiqa.
He or she sewed.
Haswudiqa.
They sewed.
Wuduwaqa.
It was sewn. It was sewed.
It's people sewed. Right? So this is the weird, how do we do the fourth person? If there's an like, a little tricky. A little tricky.
It's hard to make that one make sense in English.
Yeah. Right. People sewed. Right? Okay. So
What's that?
khwasa'at. We were asleep at the wheel. Sorry.
Wutusi'at.
Wutusa'at.
Yisa'at.
Yisa'at.
Yisa'at. Chaka.
Yisa'at.
Yisa'at.
Awsa'at.
Awsa'at. Kawuch.
Hasawsi'at.
Hasawsa'at. Sisala.
Wududziat.
Okay. So we go back to the theme. We note a couple things here. One, because it ends with an ejective, it will always be high, right? So this, and it's a zero, so this will tell us a couple things. A zero perfective that's a closed root will always be short enough. Okay? Dasawe kleikach enach ko'asi sala chose'at.
I sewed it.
Yes, well, there's no sewing here.
Oh no! Wait a minute. I made it cold.
Yes. Okay. Would you say?
We made it cold.
Yisa'at.
You made it cold.
Yisa'at.
You all made it cold.
Awsa'at.
He or she made it cold.
Hasawsa'at.
They made it cold.
Wudutsa'at.
It was made cold.
Yeah, or it was chilled. How's that? Right, yeah, it was made cold, right? It was cooled. So this is, again, because we have the subject, this is not talking about being cold. This is about, like, I put it in the fridge. I made it cold. I cooled it off. I did something to it. Right? I think that's the only way you can cool something. Okay. This one, so there's some things. This one I want to talk about just briefly. So a gate. What does that mean on its own? A gate.
Against it.
Yeah, against it, and it could mean all kinds of things. Like there's something up against the wall, or you could say whoosh gate with tutla art. We are disagreeing. We don't think the same about it, right? Whoosh gate has yuchashat. They're arguing, right? So in some ways it does have this sort of kind of negative sort of meaning sometimes. And when you say a gate with git, with git means like there's something to fall, sort of, but it means you did something wrong, right? And then it could be, and it depends on the context.
Git could also mean kimzigit, like they got up. look
Yeah,
up.
right? Keuzigit, I fell. It's the sort of
Fell.
falling. I fell up, right? Because that's how Tlingits think of waking up. It's like, and not always like you literally like fall up. But it's like, so it does. And so when we look at the combination of the root and then the classifier and the other things that are going on, this could be interpreted as a serious offense, depending on the context, or shenanigans. Depends. Chifu.
Gate, what's it?
A gate, what's a gate?
A gate would to the gate.
A gate would to the gate.
A gate yids it.
A gate yids a gate.
A gate yids a gate.
A gate yids a gate.
A gate would the gate.
A gate would the gate.
A gate has would the gate.
A gate has would the gate. Huwch.
A gate would do to get.
Okay, is cheese. Das away kleka. A gate had the gate.
A do so.
Kuwuch.
I did something wrong.
A gate would to the gate. It's not a confession, it's just an answer. A gate would to the gate.
We all did something wrong.
A gate yids a gate.
You did something wrong.
A gate yids a gate.
Y'all did something wrong.
A gate would the gate.
She did something wrong.
A gate has would the gate.
They did something wrong.
A gate would do the gate.
Something was done wrong.
Yeah. So again, we've got the z and the z going on. So these are S group and an S plus D group. All right. One has an object, one doesn't. So we get a slightly different shape in the third person. But otherwise, we've got chwese, chwedze, watuse, watudze, yisse, yidze, yise, yidze, ause, watud, or wudze, ause, haswudze, wadudze, wadudze. Right? So we get a lot of very similar patterns. All we're doing in this case is changing the consonant. So here's two more. So these are L and D plus L. It's a plus D form. This one is oots, which is to. So there's a couple of things coming back to the theme. Oops, I gotta do a little bit of editing. So one of the things that this is telling you is the type of verb. So when we say na, event verb. Na is the conjugation prefix. It's a quality of that verb. It's an event verb, and that tells you a number. There's no imperfective. Right? It's either it can't be in the process. It's broken or it's not. Right? And then transitive means there's an object and a subject. Object in transitive means there's only a subject. Subject intransitive means there's only an object, and intransitive means there's neither an object or a subject. And sometimes they're put in there kind of indirectly, and we'll look at some of those things, and we'll look at some more of these things on Thursday as far as the transitivity part of it. But for now, we don't have to worry about these terms. But if we look, we say object, subject. The object has to be there. Subject only. We can't put an object in there, right? Maybe there's some verb for like, I threw up a chicken bone, but I don't know how you would say it. Okay? So we've got vomiting, and this is also a related verb root for a flood, and oots. And one of the things is this is the verb root you'd use to have a heart attack. That's how Tlingits talk about that. Okay, Sisalakuk.
Oops.
Oots. Low and long. Chifu.
Watushakoots.
Watushakoots.
Yishakoots.
Yitlikuts.
Yisakut.
Yitlikuts.
Auschwitz.
Auschwitz.
Has Auschwitz.
Hasauschwitz.
Ududlikuts.
Wududlikuts. Dashini dasawiklikak enach chotlikuts.
I broke it.
Wutudlikuts.
We broke it.
Yitlikuts.
You broke it.
Yitlikuts.
Y'all broke it.
Auschwitz.
He or she broke it.
Hasauschwitz.
They broke it.
Wududlikuts.
It was broken.
Okay, so these are rope-like objects to break. We got different types of breaking, different types of objects. Achawe Tlingit Chasati. Kuwuch. Ook.
Quadliku.
Oh, Chotleku. Somebody's on the game. Okay, Tisla.
Utudliku.
Wutudleku. Chiku. Yidleku.
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 Udliku.
Wudleku.
Haswitz.
Haswudleku.
Wududleku.
Wududleku. Nawaya dasawe dlekach enach chotleku.
I threw up.
Wutudleku.
We threw up.
Yidleku.
You threw up.
Yidleku.
Y'all threw up.
Wudleku.
He or she threw up.
Haswudleku.
They threw up.
Wududleku.
What is that? Someone threw up?
People threw up.
People threw up?
People threw up. Like if I was telling a story about, and then there was a boat, and then people threw up. And that doesn't mean like everybody. Maybe like a bunch of people
Just
did,
some
some didn't. But we're just really saying it happened. Okay. Okay, so now we got a couple more. So this is SH and then a SH plus D. So what we've done is we've gone through these different classifier groups to look at what they look like. But we see this. In this case, if we just take the classifier off, hua, watu, ye, yi, ow, ow, would you, right? So in this case, these ones, both of these examples have objects. This one, I'm pretty sure is an act verb, and this is the one to contribute food to a potluck or some type of gathering. And the other one is to hate. I do eat so. Oh, dashjini yutko.
Khwashikon.
Khwashikon. Kuwuch.
Utushikan.
Hey, Sisala.
Yishikan.
Oh, Yishikan. I didn't even repeat that. Oh. Yishikan. Yishikan.
Aushikan.
Aushikan.
Hasaushikon.
Hasaushikon.
Ujikan.
Udujikan. Yichyesh Dasawete Kakinach Khwashikan.
Object, subject. You, I hate.
I hate it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Watushikan.
No. We hate it.
Mm-hmm. Yishikan.
You hate it.
Yishikan.
They hate it.
Y'all.
Y'all hate it.
Aushikan.
They hate it.
He or she.
He or she hate it.
Hasaushikon.
They hate it.
Wudijikan.
It was hated.
Chat wudijikan. I am hated. Yeah, wakat. Okay, Yuk. No way yet.
Khwajikuch.
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 Wutujikuch.
Watujikuch. Kuwuch.
Yichikuch.
Yijikuch. Cicela.
Yikuch.
Yijikuch. Cheetwu.
Ojakuch.
Aujakuch.
Hasaujakuch.
Hasaujakuch.
Wudujikuch.
Watujikuch. Kukrich dasawit kachinach wajakuch.
I contributed.
Watujikuch.
We contributed.
Yijikuch.
You contributed food.
Yijikuch.
Y'all contributed food.
Aujakuch.
He or she contributed.
Hasaujakuch.
They contributed.
Watujikuch.
Food was people contributed.
That's what it was. It's always tricky. Okay, so now we're going to throw thematic prefixes on there. And it makes it complicated, but the beauty is, doesn't matter how many things there are, it's always going to be the last one that creates that type of contraction. Right? So you can have up to 3, but you would always focus on the last one. And we'll start with ka, which is by far the most common one. And the most common type of ka is the horizontal surface, although in this case we have the round surface. But we'll see kahwa, kahwa, same thing. We're just, if the classifier is the same, all we're doing is swapping out the root. We're swapping out the root when the classifier is the same. Otherwise, the rules are the same. There's the 0 classifier, and then there's everything else. Okay, and some of these will be a different thematic prefix. Most of them are ka. I think a couple of them might be ya or ka. And again, these are good. Try to find ways to use some of these verbs or find verbs that are similar. Like we could borrow an orange, maybe. I don't know. A basketball. You could borrow a basketball. What else is spherical that you could borrow? A round.
A rattle.
A rattle? A dime? Okay. And then we got to plant. Okay.
Kachwa. Kachwaha.
Kachwaha.
Kautuaha.
Kautuaha.
Kiaha.
Kiaha. Kuwuch.
Kayiha.
Kayiha. Yeehaw. Cicela.
Akawaha.
Akawaha. Chifu.
Haskawaha.
Hasakawaha.
Kauduaha.
Kauduaha. Dasawete kachinach sumik kachwaha.
I planted it.
Kautuaha.
We planted it.
Kiyaha.
You planted it.
Kayiha.
Y'all planted it.
Akawaha.
He or she planted it.
Hasakawaha.
They planted it.
Kauduaha.
People planted it.
Right. Or it was planted. Either way, I think it's fine.
The object of it, ka, I, planted.
Right.
Okay.
And so this is one that's really the type of object, like you could probably say, sin ikachwaha, if you were talking to the carrots, right? And maybe you would. But these are ones, there's a number of these, like to borrow, where you probably wouldn't be talking to the object, so the object stays as a third-person object pretty much all the time. Right? And the third-person object could be an it, but the third-person subject can't be an it. Like, yeah. So we've got K-A underline X, so hua, just like we did without the ka, so that doesn't create any real change. Kautua instead of wutua. So we see a little bit of contraction in the perfective. Kia as opposed to yi. So what happens is ka plus I is ki, and then the classifier pops back up unchanged. Kayi, that one doesn't change. Akawa, when you'd have awa, so that doesn't necessarily know. There's the jumps to the outside of the thematic prefix. Hasakawa, and then kaudua. So kautua and kaudua, the first person plural and the fourth person are always going to be kind of similar. You're just going to go from t to d. That's all that's going to happen as far as sound goes. Okay. Yitkrohaka?
Kahwahis.
Kahwahis.
Kautuahis.
Kautuahis.
He's.
Kiahis.
Kaihis.
Kayihis.
Akawahis.
Akawahis.
Hasakawahis.
Hasakawahis.
Kauduahis.
Kauduahis. Chipu dasawik kachinach. Kachwahis.
I borrowed it, or around.
Yeah, away. Kautuahis.
We borrowed it.
Kiahis.
You borrowed it.
Kayihis.
You all borrowed it.
Akawahis.
She or he borrowed it.
Hasakawahis.
They borrowed it.
Kauduahis.
It was borrowed.
Okay.
So the fourth one, his. Why am I having problems trying to go his?
Oh. So like
Shortening it
kayi. So we need to have the yi,
in there.
the perfective for the second person plural. There should always be a y-e-e-y in there, right? So, for example, if this were not a round object, if this was just a regular default object, how would you say I borrowed it?
I borrowed it. Ahwahis.
Huahis. We borrowed it. Watuahis. You borrowed it.
Yahis.
Yehis. Y'all borrowed it.
Okay.
Yehis. Somebody borrowed it. Or he or she borrowed it, sorry. Awahis. They borrowed it.
Hasawahis.
Hasawahis. It was borrowed.
Uduahi.
Wahis kunachit a. Wasak atuakad Tlingit chinach. Who borrowed it?
Aduch sawe awahis.
Aduch sawe awahis. Aduch sawe akawahis achkuchetai. I was angry because I wanted to play basketball, right? So we're getting the patterns, right? So that we just keep repeating these and keep looking at these. Have the exact same things in the prefix. Kahwa, kahwa, kautua, kautua. Okay, so again, start changing the classifier
So would
now.
awahis just be without the round? I mean, it could be borrowing something.
Yeah, like you borrowed money, right? Huahis, jinkat don, achkla jidach. Like, let's see. I don't know if there's any other types of objects to borrow.
Hida.
That's round.
Oh, it's spherical, isn't it? Kind of.
Oh,
But it's long
yeah.
and skinny. That would be a different
So
handle.
that would
verb.
probably be, well, so this wouldn't necessarily be a handling verb.
But would it have anything to do with the thematic prefix? Because they're similar in the.
That's one way to find out. What is that? This is the way to find it. Oh, there's more. But we can ask speakers. If you want to ask speakers. So here we go. Borrow in general. Oh, we can borrow a stove. Okay. Somebody say, I borrowed a stove. Yep, so this, and it should be high, it'll always be high. We borrowed a stove. You don't have to say the stove, just say we borrowed. With two shahis. That's a way to kalkinach. Has the kaushahis.
They borrowed it.
With two shahis.
It was
borrowed.
Guksa ishtuch. With two shahis. Somebody borrowed.
It was borrowed.
Who borrowed my
It was
stove?
borrowed.
So here's, oh, there's the
table
stick
has been
light.
borrowed.
A kaushahis. Our table. Oh, a gun. That would be a gun as well. Kaushahis. So here's kashahis for the pencil. How would I say, who borrowed my pencil? A duch sowe, a kaushahis, a kuhidagi. How would I say, you borrowed my mother's pencil? Wait, he said. Right, so we come back to here. He, and then we get the classifier he's. Right. Okay. 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 These are switched here, but they both pop up here. There's some other things that happen. There's a number of different. So we say ya ka subject. D. I gotta fix that. D plus 0. Nosh, and then we've got, what does this cross mean?
Doesn't change.
It doesn't change. It's long and high every time. This is to shake your head, often to signal no. Right? So now we've got ya and ka, and then the subject. But then we'll see it's going to be the same, but we just go ya ka, and then we get into the other variations here. The next one, we list it as, I gotta change that too. I was working on this just a few minutes ago. Tain. So this is telling you that there's not going to be a low version. There's going to be long and high, short and high, right? But these are both zero conjugation prefix verbs. Oops, that one's invariable, but this one will be short and high every time. Now, the speaker says sun, but a lot of speakers would say tsen. But this is one that could be tsain or tsan, depending on the speaker. It's a speaker preference. It's probably a regional thing. It's probably a dialect thing. Who went last? I forget. Well, no.
It was Cecil.
Cecil, okay. Chiwu, go.
Dasa? Ash?
Yeah, we'll do this one so I can't highlight it. This top left one here.
Yakach Dinash.
Yakau Dinash.
Yakau to Dinash.
Yakau to Dinash.
Yakai Dinash.
Yakai Dinash.
Yakayi Dinash.
Yakayi Dinash.
Yakau Dinash.
Yakau Dinash.
Husikau Dinash.
Husikau Dinash.
Yakau Dinash.
Yakau Dinash. Oops. I messed that one. Where's the mistake? Somebody fix that mistake for me.
I'll do a nosh.
You can't do a nosh. Okay. Who wrote Kabuch? Das a week like kach enach ye kach de nosh.
I quieted down.
Oops, sorry. I get these backwards. I gotta fix it. It's this one.
Oh.
I shook my head.
Ye kau tu de nosh.
We all shook our head.
Ye kai de nosh.
You shook your head.
Ye kai yi de nosh.
Y'all shook your head.
Ye kau de nosh.
He or she shook their head.
Has ye kau de nosh.
They shook their heads.
Ye kau du wa nosh.
People shook their heads.
This is a different one than this. Yeah, the verb.
Ek shach de nosh. Yeah,
Why
that
would
one.
they have sha as being one of the thematic prefixes in there?
What's that?
Why would they not have sha as one of the thematic prefixes in
It
the
is.
verb?
Oh, in that one?
Yeah, I mean, why ya ka as thematic prefix rather than sha?
Because if, well, I guess I gotta,
it's your ya
right?
and it's not your sha.
Because maybe if you were shakau danash, maybe it'd be like that. I don't know. Because it's sort of to and fro. So your face is going to and fro as opposed to your head. Which is why when you go shakau danash, it's the tip of your finger going back and forth. Now, you can't do it. If you drew a little face on there. Then that might be shayau danash, maybe. Shayau danash. Anyways, thoughts, questions? There's more of these things that we need to go through. That was pretty good though. It felt like we were getting. So there's this thing. I gotta fix it. It's, as usual, it's a new thing. I'll send out an updated version. Hopefully tonight, maybe tomorrow. But what there's going to be is there'll be a section that gives you some different verb themes. And it'll say conjugate these and write the pattern for all for the first person plural, second person plural, third person plural, fourth person. That's what we're going to work. But that way, when you get any verb, you should be able to take a really good guess at how to conjugate that per person in the perfective mode. Especially if you see a perfective, like if you look through Carrie's website and you see the perfective form of that, you should be able to say I verb, you verb, thou verb, all of that. Yeah, Keka?
Sure.
Check. Like. Kas ishkeke. Kas I ushkeke. I guess that's enough. Cheese, uchiyat, the kat yuhan, igoyachwan. Echakwe.
Finished.